Welcome to our video series about the US tax reform. My name is Matthias Amberg. I'm a partner with Rödl and Partner in Chicago, and I'm joined today by Elisa Fay, who is the head of our national tax practice in the US. As you are most likely aware of, the US just passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in December, which is probably the most significant legislation passed over the last 30 years. These are exciting times for us as CPAs, but obviously also for US companies. There has been a lot of discussion about the impacts of the US tax reform for German companies doing business in the United States. Over the course of our web series, we hope to provide you with a better understanding about the impacts of the tax reform on German businesses. So, let's get right started. Elisa, before we go into detail, what do you think are the overall effects for German companies doing business in the US?
Well, as you did say earlier, this has been the most significant legislation that we have had in over 30 years. So this is in fact huge.
Huge?
Yes, huge, as our president would like to say.
Exactly.
So, I know over the course of our series, we'll talk about some of the specific provisions in more detail. But for now, I'll just give you a couple of the highlights. So first and foremost is the rate reduction in the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. So that is a really, really big deal, I think, for the German Mittelstand, operating in the U.S.
Sure.
Some of the other provisions that I think are really exciting are full expensing of asset purchases. That's a very exciting provision. And second, we have a new provision for export. So companies who are actually exporting inventory or services to other foreign countries, we now have a new export deduction. So that's an interesting new deduction as well. Of course, we've got to pay for this tax rate.
Sure.
So everything can't be positive, right? So there are a few not so great things as well. First is the new interest limitation rules. These have gotten a little stricter than our prior rules. Second, we have a new tax on base erosion payments or certain base erosion payments. And then third, there's a new tax on what we refer to as GILTI, which is Global Intangible Low Taxed Income, a mouthful.
Okay.
And actually I think is a misnomer because it really doesn't have anything to do with intangibles at all. But I think overall the legislation is going to be really positive for our German Mittelstand clients, and I think we're going to see increased investment from the German Mittelstand into the U.S.
Oh, I guess these are good news.
Yes.
Yeah. Elisa, do you see any certain industries which might have the biggest tax advantages out of this tax reform?
Yeah, I think certainly in Germany the automobile industry will benefit, as well as the machine manufacturing industry, and of course all the suppliers related to those industries. I think those are all the industries that are going to see great benefits here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, you talked about the tax rate reduction, which is very significant. Do you think the US is becoming now a tax haven? I mean, as a lot of, or some people accuse Donald Trump?
Yeah, actually, is that a bad thing to be a tax haven? I don't know, maybe.
Sure.
Actually, it does make me laugh a little bit because I think it's funny that people actually think we might be a tax haven, right? Because for many, many years, we've had one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world. But I did see recently where the rates were published for all the countries worldwide, and the U.S. is actually now just falling in the middle. So we really aren't considered a tax haven. And specifically when compared to Germany, with the 21% rate, and if you add in our state rates, you really get to a overall rate that is just a little bit lower than the German corporate income tax rate, plus the Gewerbesteuer.
Gewerbesteuer, richtig, sehr gut, very good.
Yes.
I mean, when I look to our clients, a lot of our clients are actually investing in the US, and they establish or they set up a partnership structure. Now you are talking about the significant decrease of the corporate tax. So does that mean those companies should consider to switch their structure from a partnership structure to a corporate structure?
Yeah, well, certainly I think that most people, myself included, that was the initial reaction when this was being talked about. I think we were all thinking, yes, we're going to, switch everyone into a corporate structure. And I thought I would be busy for the next, 2 years just doing nothing but converting all our clients into corporate structures. But actually, when we started really looking at it in more detail and looking at the structures closer, it turns out that our structure that we've always recommended in the past, which is typically investing through a partnership in the U.S., as you well know, that turns out to be the structure that I think we're still going to continue to recommend going forward in the future, because what we're really seeing is just an overall downward trend in the worldwide effective tax rate. So with an LP or a limited partnership in the U.S., typically what we've done for our German Mittelstand clients is to have that owned by a KG in Germany, and that KG often will elect to be taxed as a corporation in the U.S., so it's actually getting the benefit, of the corporate rate reduction.
Okay, well, I think that is great news probably for a good amount of our clients.
Absolutely.
Elisa, are there any other considerations which companies need to keep in mind to avoid tax or to take advantage of certain new deductions?
Sure. I think two things come to mind immediately. One is supply chain, and the second is how a business would finance their operations in the U.S. And I think we'll talk more about the financing in another one of our web series. But with respect to supply chain, as I mentioned earlier, this new export deduction, and I think that's a great opportunity for companies that are actually exporting, goods and services to foreign countries to see if it would be better to somehow reroute, their supply chain through the U.S. rather than through Germany or some other European country. But I think I always like to look at everything holistically, right? You can't just look at one thing, because one of the things about the new export deduction is that it relies on having a U.S. domestic corporation to take advantage of that, which is a little bit contradictory to what I said earlier about like having a limited partnership in the U.S., right? So you really have to look at everything on the whole together to see what would be the most beneficial for our clients. And that's what we're currently doing, is trying to look at our clients on the whole and seeing with respect to the rate and the type of entity, supply chain, all of these things, what really makes the most sense.
Elisa, thank you very much for this introduction on the tax reform. So please make sure that you also visit our other videos where we explore all the impacts on the tax reform for the German Mittelstand in more detail.